Hey, walaikum salam.
This is great. We never had an intellectual powwow, so I'm just really excited about this moment.
Yeah,
So
me too.
let's get into it, right?
Okay.
So as I mentioned, Harness is hosting these conversations about the first 100 days, what they're calling Reimagine America, and they're putting people within the Harness community in conversation so that we can ideate, we can imagine, and we can dream of a brighter, more joyful future for everyone and what that looks like and how to make that happen. What does it mean to think about intersectionality, not just as identity, but as power? My definition is that it's a web of interlocking systems that structure power relations. And how Kimberly Crenshaw, what she says in her article is that it's where power comes and collides.
You know, we all stand on axes in different places. So axes of race and gender and class and sexuality and religion. And, you know, there's spaces of privilege and spaces of oppression. And then there's, you know, it's kind of like a sliding scale, right? Where we can talk about like a racial hierarchy with Black folks and Indigenous folks being at the bottom of a racial hierarchy, right? But it's really important to remember that there are multiple axes that exist simultaneously. So when we talk about ourselves as women of color, right, you can't say, oh, I experienced that as a woman and I experienced that as a Black person, right? I'm always at the same time a Black woman, Muslim, from a working class background, and you know, all of these things all at the same time. And so it's important to understand that where you stand along these axes, if you have privilege according to whiteness, right, that also translates into power. We as people of color are anti-racist because we have to be, because we are, you know, disempowered along that axis. White folks get to choose, get to decide whether or not to be racist, not racist, or anti-racist, right? And I think that it's important that we don't pretend that have equal footing, that we stand on equal footing. Intersectionality absolutely means recognizing that, you know, there's these spaces that power collides, spaces that are positions of oppression collide, and we stand in those spaces simultaneously. And there's spaces that we also occupy that are positions of privilege.
We go back to the Capitol attack, the insurrection on January 6th. There was a lot of labeling of the people, the actors involved as domestic terrorists. There was a quick sort of shuffling around of different labels and then lining up on domestic terrorism. But then there was a counter by Muslims, including Black Muslims, who said, you know, I don't know if we should use this language. It might expand the state's power to create more of a state surveillance under the eye of terrorism or counterterrorism policy. But also, then there was a reflection in our community about the narrative of this country being white terror for Black folks, for Indigenous folks. So where do you weigh in on this? How do you think about the use of domestic terrorism, the power or the shortcomings of it, or if you have any other thoughts?
So my preferred term is white supremacist terrorism. That's what I think it was. White supremacist terrorism. I'm not going to call it domestic terrorism, because when you say that, then you're saying, well, what is it in contrast to, right? And so I think that there's been a lot of conversation. I think it was absolutely a terrorist attack. I also don't like the term insurrection, because up until the January 6th failed coup, the January 6th white supremacist terrorist attack, right, insurrections were really, when you think about insurrections, you thought about things like rebellions of enslaved people, right? The rising up of oppressed people against power. And these were not oppressed people rising up against power. They were powerful people trying to make sure that they retained their monopoly on racial capitalism.
That point about insurrection is something I was thinking about when it first emerged, was Detroit insurrection in the 60s, and Watts in the 60s as well, and Harlem. And then of course, LA 1992 insurrection. So it was curious to me that that language was reimposed on this situation. So I'm really grateful for that intervention you made. I wonder if I hear you around white supremacist terrorism. And I don't want to impose this, but I think there's something powerful about white supremacist terror, because
I
it
see that.
doesn't,
Yeah.
it gives us a history as opposed to a policy, you know?
I like that. I see that. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I see that.
Yeah. This is what happens, folks.
See, this is why we got to get some brains together and, you know, come up with new terms, agree on terms. When you say terror, it's an attempt. They're attempting to terrorize us.
Yes. Yes.
But then
yes.
how do we resist being terrorized? Like, I always tell the kids, mama ain't scared of shit, right? Like, I'm not scared of shit. So they're attempting to put me in a state of terror, but I'm not.
Yes.
You know? So, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I would love to talk that through more.
Yeah, because what we're also thinking about is Baldwin-esque in terms of like the deep fears, that psychological pathology of fear of us turns into terror, right?
Right.
And then so that gets externalized, but like you were saying, you're trying to make us afraid of you, and you're trying to make us be the fearful thing, right? And that's part of the terror, is making us into some sort of subject and to be subjugated as well. We're not recognizing the depth of crisis right now, which is like the pandemic crisis, which is the economic crisis that for decades has been a windfall. And the strategy has always been austerity, and the strategy has always been to take from poor folks, to take from middle class folks, and then give it back up and socialize our money to the wealthy. So what happened back with the PPP loans in April in the Trump administration that Biden should have rectified, we need to push him to rectify, is that this was the biggest wealth transfer theft in American history. Right. And if we don't say that, if we don't name it, then we're living in a place where we're still demanding one $2,000 check. What we need to demand is a New Deal set of packaged goods. Cancel student debt, full stop. 50K, if that happens, okay, fine. But really, our goal, our North Star is it's all gone. We need a monthly stipend. We need universal health care.
Universal basic income.
Yeah, universal basic income. We need support for single mothers who, at the pandemic, I can't even imagine what it's been like for you to juggle teaching your children and then at the same time your work and organizing. We need a full package. We need to call this a new deal for the 21st century.
Well,
otherwise,
can I pause you for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
We actually have a name for it. It's called the Breathe Act.
Breathe Act. Absolutely.
The Breathe Act. Yes. I know we're both behind that. So yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the Breathe Act, and you can see politicians, organizers, public figures who've supported it. Please go look at the Breathe Act, which is an amazing package of policies that are being called for to shift things, and is very intersectional as well, in the ways that we've been talking about it today.